Chuck. How's it going?
It's going on wonderful. I'm surviving a nice cold winter up here in Maine, but I've been able to get out skiing a couple times, so that helps these long cold winters.
Yeah, I was reading your bio and you were saying that you've been an avid skier for about 50 years.
Yeah, since I was like 3 years old, so almost on my sixth decade of skiing.
So you must have really good foundational strength then. Yeah. So you do this thing where you're helping children and as is it children as athletes or just children and athletes?
No, it's primarily teenagers, teen athletes
Teen athletes, okay.
tend to be the ones who they and their parents gravitate towards the work for whatever reason. And I work with the families too. So when I work with a teen, I'm doing everything in my power to encourage, incentivize parents to kind of go right along with them because, well, there's a lot of reason from family dynamics to really helping the parents the same way I'm helping the teenager and the growth that they have together. It's real, it's a cliche, but it is priceless.
Yeah.
So so I work with families even though most of the time people are seeking me to work with their teenagers.
Obviously with both parents having to work these days and all that, it's hard for them to show up to everything. But I think to get them to show up to some of the events to give that time, it really helps with the kids' adjustment and mentality. When I played baseball as a young kid, my dad was at every game. My mom couldn't be because she was at work, and I never like, oh my god, you didn't make my game. But then again, I wasn't a serious athlete. I wasn't trying to be in the MLB or anything like that. But so, where did this drive or want to help athletic teens? Where did that come from?
It's interesting because from the earliest memory, and I grew up on my mom's side of the family in particular from a family of educators. People had told me for a long time, "You should get into teaching, you should be in teaching," but I had no interest in that. Getting done college, I actually was trying to figure out, I had a degree in economics, and I'm trying to figure out what I wanna do, and I had decided I was gonna go into the Navy, become a Navy pilot. Well, that didn't pan out, and within hours of getting that letter that said that I didn't get in the Navy flight program, I got a call from the Auburn Public Library about a book that I had reserved. I didn't. My mom had reserved it, and had come in because a couple weeks before, we had been listening to this young guy pushing his new psychology book stuff, and we were both, like, enthralled by him. Well, the book was Unlimited Power, and the guy was Tony Robbins. So that book really I went out to California to meet Tony, that was my express purpose. Ended up getting certified by him in NLP. Along the way, I started doing more and more work with young people, and that set of circumstances ended up leading me into public education, where I've worked with kids for about 30 years who really struggled in school, and all those struggles and all those experiences and all the training I kept getting, just like this age is like so crucial for building the skills. And I'm not just talking about thinking that comes with like, the language arts and the math and all those things, right? I'm talking about how to really think about the things that matter in terms of the psychology and mindset and those things that really ultimately drive everything.
Yeah.
So that, and I loved it. I loved working with the kids. I loved seeing the results with them.
Right. No, and that's good. I mean, it obviously when it clicks with a kid, it bears fruit, right? You're able to see them actually get it and apply it to their lives. Obviously, if you're into athletics, I think athletics are fairly important. So what do you feel athletics bring to an adolescent's life? Besides, I mean, like discipline and things like that.
Yeah, perhaps one of the biggest lessons, and it's true in all sports, but I was a baseball guy, and baseball is especially true, but how to deal with failure and adversity and how to work with teammates and other people. And that the dealing with failure is probably one of the biggest ones. And I really feel that in the modern world, there's been a real shift, even in the time I was in education, of people afraid to let kids fail.
Yeah.
and trying to protect them too much from all the, you know, life the storms of life, they come, right? And you can't protect them from them, but we've got so many people who think that's their job to protect them from them. And sports is different. We still understand that we can't protect them from adversity and losing and being benched and, all these other things. And at each level you progress, that competition gets a little more intense. And there are a lot of great lessons about how to deal with that. I was a good athlete, but not a great athlete. And, I had 2 guys playing in front of me in baseball in high school who were Division I players. I was not. So I understood that, all right, I got a different role. But you know what? I love being on a team. I love practicing, and I'm gonna do my role as well as possible. And those were lessons that were kinda taught me along the way.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing like, you have all this anticipation. Like, I remember when I told you before when I played baseball, you would go into this game and you would be all optimistic. And then, like, I remember we were ahead by 1 point, and it was the typical scenario of a baseball game, bottom of the ninth, last at bat for the other team. And they send their cleanup guy. There was two guys on base, first and second or something like that. And he knocked it completely out of the field. And it was like, we got this. And he just slapped the crap out of that ball. And we're like, this sucks, but you learn from it, and then you're able to come back from it, and it's not the end of the world. And it's like a little bit like getting punched in the face. It makes you realize that you're not going to break from one loss. You know what I mean? It lets you know that you're stronger than you think you are when it comes to that kind of thing. What are some of the things that you feel that is hardest for children right now? Like, what do you think that they're facing that we didn't face coming up?
There's 3 major things that kids stress over, which are not new. Some
Right.
of the things around it are. So let me just kinda say specifically, the 3 things are the pressures to excel, whether it is sports or whether it's academics, getting into that right college and all that. And that's not necessarily old, but it seems to be increasing, right? Colleges go up in price beyond a lot of families. That pressure now to get in and to get a scholarship or get into the right school. So those pressures seem to be increasing. All the testing mandates now that schools are under in order to get funding and meet all this other stuff, schools have benchmarks they have to meet. And not so suddenly, they are pushing pressure on kids to really do well because their performance ends up mattering. So that's accelerated. And then there's the relationship pressures, both peers and with parents and adults. And the peer one, the big thing with that's really changed is social media.
Yeah.
And the constant comparison 24/7 never leaves. The people who can, say it the wrong thing and they do it feeling like they don't get found out or whatever when they do it via social media is much different than it's face to face. That happens an enormous amount of times, and that perhaps is probably the biggest one. And there's some pretty good research that's out there. There's a book called The Anxiety Generation, and Jonathan Haidt's the author of that, and he also co-wrote Coddling of the American Mind. And there's I think pretty convincing data about the causative nature of a lot of the mental health issues with our smartphones and social media, not just correlative. There's some pretty good evidence that it is actually causing this to happen. The peer pressure thing is not new, but the social media element of it has dramatically increased that, and that is new.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I want to kind of go back to something. We were talking about sports and how it makes you understand that losing is okay. And I think when I was playing, it was in the late 80s, early 90s. And that's when we didn't have the participation trophy thing.
Yeah.
You either lost or you won. And I think when there's no last place, I think that really changed athletics, and it did it in a negative way. After I did baseball, I did martial arts competitively. I did taekwondo. I was 16 at the time, so I competed in that. And you see the parents, and they're on the sidelines, and like they're getting into fights. Like, their kid loses, and they're trying to fight parent of the kid that won. So I think that I think with you doing what you're doing, trying to mediate that between the teenager and the parent is good because there needs to be set realist expectations. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
that some parents throw that out the window, but that's what I wanted to touch on that.
It's that's one of the things that I when I work with the kids and the parents, it is about helping the parents begin to identify some of these stories they've told themselves, and they oftentimes and I had to be careful about this. I love sports, and I wanted my kids involved in sports, and I had to be careful about not, "All right, am I pushing them into this, or is it really coming from them?" There's a lot of great lessons, all those things, and my kids took to it, so I think that was I didn't cross that line, but as a very competitive person also, it can be hard sometimes to, kinda sit there and not get caught up in that. Helping parents begin to identify some of those things in their own life and the emotions that they still might be carrying on to are invaluable, and it helps me break or help show parents how to let go of some of those and really improve that relationship. Did an interview with somebody I on my own podcast, who's been involved in baseball his entire life, and he's got a book coming out, but he talked a lot about the ride home and how that ride home can really break kids. And man, and it's not necessarily like that overbearing, really hard father or mother, like getting on them. It's just like immediately showing or trying to teach the kid, oh, you could have done this different or you could have done that different instead of just giving the kid a chance to, you know, you don't want them to kind of get stuck in that negative emotion, but letting them just have a little bit of time to kind of
Absorb it.
process and is important. And there are oftentimes the ride home, you've got parents who are overzealous,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word, and trying to fix things or help protect the kid from it happening again.
And that brings up what you said earlier about wanting to protect the kid from hurt. But you can guarantee that that kid during that car ride home is kicking his own ass. You know what I mean? Like when I played baseball, it was just something fun to do. I had no aspirations of being a pro athlete. It was a good activity for me to do to get out and get exercise and to be a kid. But there were some kids on the team that I was on, their parents were, this is your future. It's like varsity blue.
Yeah,
It was just all this pressure, and kids have enough. I mean, they're going through hormone changes. They're going through this awkward phase of hitting puberty and all this other stuff. You don't need to add on to it. You're just going to push that kid to a level of insanity that's just not fair, and
yeah.
and sometimes you have to let the kids be kids. So since you're an educator, I want to know what your opinion of the school system is today.
Oh, boy, public schools have some real challenges, some real issues, and some of it is structural, systemic. And what I mean by that is, so the model that we operate under is is democratic, right? So we have school boards that control school systems, and those school board members are, elected, but they represent pockets of the community, right? Little neighborhoods and little branches and parts. And there are things that can go on in schools that are coming down from the professional educators and the university people. In education, we sometimes joke about there's no new ideas. They're just recycling, repackages these old ideas. And if you're in it long enough, you're just going to see the same idea come back again, which is an element of truth in that. But in this world, this day and age, a lot of these things have become very political. And so I use my own town as an example. When we moved and we found the house that we bought, my wife and I, you know, you, you're trying to figure out the neighborhood, balance everything out. Which school will my kids go to? How is that school? All those kinds of things that play into some of that decision making. Well, the elementary school they were going to go to was a good school, but then as they got towards the end of that elementary school, leadership began to change and the things changed at that elementary school and the middle school they were gonna go to. Well, the only option that we have if we don't like things are, okay, we could try to vote out our school board member. But if our school board member is one of many, we don't have many options about we don't like the direction this is going, except trying to pull them out homeschool or send them to a private school. That can be really problematic. And then of course, I think schools, and this is part of why I am going into schools, is we have forgotten, and I'm not even sure how well we ever really did it. But I call some of the programs I have planting possibility because we don't do well helping kids realize their potential inside, and their way of thinking. So the kids I worked with, I had so many over the years who early in elementary school, somehow or other, their love of learning began to get snuffed out. They began to not realize the potential, the possibilities that they had, both as a student and as a person. That led to all kinds of emotional, academic issues and challenges. And until I could begin to break down some of those beliefs that began to creep in elementary school, I wasn't gonna get anywhere with their academic or social emotional progress. Some of that is systemic and some of it's the nature of life too,
Yeah,
right?
of course. Yeah, I just, when I was coming up in school, I was dyslexic, or I am dyslexic. So they didn't really, and it was just in like numbers and some reading, but I was able to overcome the reading portion of my dyslexia. The numerical part, not so much. But anyways, so instead of like working with me to get past it, they just slapped me in ESE, which is basically learning disability classes. And instead of like working with me and making it to where I, could get away from it eventually, they just left me there. I had a guidance counselor when I was a kid. I wanted to be a massage therapist, and her direct quote, she says, "You're not smart enough to do that." Who are you to tell me that? So now I have a job that's even more complicated than that. But then again, I think that kind of helped me be the person that I am today, because it was very much, I'm going to show you. That's my attitude now. It's like, don't tell me I can't do something, because I'm going to stick it up your posterior. I think that teachers today feel so underpaid and unappreciated, they just don't care.
Yeah.
And the ones that do get, they tell them to shut up or sit down or whatever. They want to involve their politics in teaching, or their sexual identity and all that other stuff. That's a whole different podcast. Do you think that I mean, obviously, I'm asking a big question here. What do you think it would take to fix it?
From a political standpoint, I'm a big supporter of voucher systems, and the
Okay.
reason is you're getting control back to the parent who can say, "You know what? My kid now, when they're upper elementary, middle school, this really isn't the right school for them." And right now, they don't really have much option. With a voucher and the money follows a kid, now they can go, "You know what? Across town or even maybe the next town over, there's a better school. There's a better option. I would like to go there." And that voucher system helps narrow that gap. I still remember having a way back when I was working on my master's degree in education, a professor, and the topic of vouchers came up, and the professor said, "Listen, all vouchers will do is they're just gonna subsidize the rich people who send their kids to private schools. That's all it's gonna do." And my response was, you're assuming that the supply is gonna stay constant. It's not, because people like me who can now market to people who have a voucher will come up with ideas, will come up with a new school to offer some people. The supply is not gonna stay status quo, which was kind of what her argument was, and she just kinda went, "Right, oh, I didn't think of that." So, from a political standpoint, that's one aspect. The other, and that this is where the work is I'm doing, is trying to get into schools and help schools change the culture and offer some real courses. And I actually coined a term called no shift. And the idea there is that what the class does is help train people to shift their thinking and their perspective on situations so that they can begin to view things differently than they did beforehand, right? It's learning to reframe and shift your thinking when things aren't really kind of working the way you want them to or expecting. And this is all trainable, it's teachable, how to manage your emotions, how to discover what those beliefs are that you have that are limiting your ability. I tell a story often of a student I had, Andy, who was not a good math student, was not a good student, but it really all of it centered around this belief he had about math. So we were attacking that, but we weren't getting anywhere until one day he's kind of blurted out. This is like, I got him first as a sixth grader, and I usually didn't take sixth graders. It's usually seventh and eighth graders. This is the very beginning of his eighth grade year, and he just kind of like, Mr. Barnard, I just can't understand math. Nobody in my family ever has been able to. My parents, my grandparents, all the way back. And I was like, so he had inherited this inability to do math, and he wasn't taking ownership of it because it was something passed down to him. And the process of fixing that began with a simple reframe. And it was like, let me ask you a question. If you inherited your house from your dad, like, could you sell it if you wanted to? He's like, yeah. So if you inherit something, it's yours to kind of accept or not. Well, yeah. And I said, well, the same with a belief. And the belief that you can't do math that you inherited, you don't need to hold on to it. And then we had to work with him on how to actually change it. But once he did, he went from a bottom 10th percentile in math to 50th percentile. And he went from doing fifth grade math as an eighth grader to doing eighth grade math in 1 year.
That's
In
amazing.
1 year.
Yeah, and so it goes to show you that finding the root cause of the problem and fixing it is probably the best way to go about it. If he hadn't have said to you that nobody in my family can do math, you never would have figured that out. You could have, but it would have been a longer journey to do so. So that's amazing. I think you're doing really good work. Like, and it's hard for like that guidance counselor told me that I couldn't do something. That is the exact opposite of what you're doing. You have children need tempered expectations, but they also need encouragement because when your our brains don't fully form until we're what 21, I think, or 24 or something. So
Yeah,
uh, yeah,
25. Yeah.
yeah. So it's literally like my I had one of my nephews was like he wanted to smoke weed, and I'm like, no, don't. And he goes, why? I said, because your brain isn't fully formed yet.
Yeah.
Or were you born in Maine or were you born somewhere else?
Nope, I'm a native Mainer. In fact, my roots in New England, because Maine, of course, used to be part of Massachusetts way back, but they go like I Mayflower. So
Wow.
Mayflower, and then on my dad's side of the family, the Barnards helped settle Nantucket Island in the 1600s. So my roots are really deep in New England.
Wow. Yeah, I would say so. I took a travel assignment to Boston. I was in Burlington, Massachusetts at Beth Israel Lahey Hospital. And so I got to spend some time in that part of the country. And it's absolutely beautiful up there. Just all the scenery and the people were so welcoming and nice. So no, I have nothing good. I have nothing but good things to say about the northeast of the country.
When I was talking about this planning possibilities
Yeah.
stuff, the idea is perfect for schools, but even small businesses, right?
Hmm.
Who sometimes have challenges with their employees and the entrepreneur who's trying to juggle everything. We can get really stuck in our stress. And, I did a podcast interview for the American Institute of Stress, and I'm a diplomat for them. And teaching and helping people understand how stress happens, the emotion of stress, strategies to get out of stress has such a profound impact from a personal standpoint. I totally understand the importance of it and the power of it, and this kinda goes back to the what we were talking about earlier with school systems too. My wife taught for, a number of years in the same school system that she grew up in. So it was like, that had been her dream. She just wanted to get through school and come back and teach at her high school, and she did. She had been a student or coach or teacher in that system her whole life, and she loved it. It was like her second family, and some of the political aspects were shifting and changing. This is just before COVID, and she cared so much, and there wasn't really much room for that caring. And some of the coping strategies that she used to do to deal with stress had kind of slipped by. She began to lose her energy, and she diagnosed with cancer in June of 2022 and passed away in July. Part of what motivates me now is helping people understand that I came to really understand on a personal level was sometimes people are holding on to stuff so much, right? That all that stress and trying to put a good front up. And there are some habits and rituals in your life that can really, really, really make a difference in dealing with that. My wife used to be a runner. She had been a runner and she she lost her energy to run. Then she began walking, but that release was now gone, right? And that way of dealing with the stress, and she didn't really have an outlet, and she just kept internalizing everything. So to anybody out there listening, my message to you would be become aware. That's step number one of what you are stressing. And then I talk a lot about sow seeds of possibility.
Mhm.
And that's applicable even to your own health, right? What's possible for your own health? What are those stories? That's the S in so. What's the stories you're telling yourself about stress, about health, about your own family history of health? All these things. Identify some of these labels and adjectives you've used to describe yourself in all kinds of different contexts of your life. Then take ownership. Which ones, okay, that's helpful. That's good. I like that one. Or, it might not be too helpful to say I can't do math or boy, my grandfather, great grandfather, they all had strokes. So, I come from a family. Those sort of stories aren't probably serving you very well. So identify them, own them. That's the O, and then weed them out. And that can be the part where sometimes people need help weeding them out. Um, but there's a couple simple strategies I tell people all the time is some positive affirmations, anchoring techniques, listening to music is a powerful way to change your mood, journaling, getting those negative feelings written down, what triggered it. Boy, is it really? Am I just blowing that out of proportion, or is that really some real evidence to it? There's some techniques like that can really help.
I channel all the stress that I have for my job into working out, and I know that if I go into a workout session with heavy weight, and I know if I give it my all, I'm gonna be completely drained, and everything is just left on in a puddle in the gym floor, because the stress is probably worse than smoking. It's worse than bad diet. It adds all this cortisol in your system, and it just literally eats you from the inside out. And I was listening to an interview with Billy Bob Thornton, and he smokes about 5 cigarettes a day. And he said, and his doctor asked him, he said, why do you do that? And he goes, it helps manages my stress. And he goes, perfect. If 5 cigarettes a day, it's not great, but it's not terrible, He's like, if that keeps you from having all this stress in your life, then do it. Now, I think that's a negative thing to do. I don't think it's a healthy thing to do. I think you should replace that with something. But I think as time progresses, we're going to find out that stress is probably the worst killer of everything. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
But because it just leads to so much it just messes up your chi. So I ask this question of everybody that comes on my show, and this is the first one. What are two core beliefs that define you as a human being?
So I think first and foremost is the belief that I was created in the image of God. So when I have that and that frames me, then it's like I have a responsibility to live that way. And like that it's a powerful mindset shift to have and very challenging to also try to live up to that, right? But
100%,
but it
brother.
it it obviously, when I begin to veer off the path, and kind of go, all right, I probably, let things get me a little bit too much and reacted out of anger or whatever. And I come back or somebody says something that I've taken too personally.
Mhm.
Like, you know what? I'm made in the image of God. I have to you're the one I have to kinda please. It just grounds me in some ways. It just it's an awesome thing to think about.
It really is. Yeah. No. And listen, as a person of faith myself, I think you need some sort of foundation in a higher power or God or whatever. But for me, it's Jesus, and that's the way it always will. I think as us as humans, we crave that communion with the universe, God, ever how you want to say it. And then the other question is, you're about to shuff off the mortal coil and go to the next life. What do you want to be known for?
That's a great question. What comes back, and I have this on my things. I'm gonna kinda circle back a little bit, but is to be able to stand before God and hear him say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." So, for that to happen, I I want people to say that he was doing his utmost to represent God by helping people fulfill find their true destiny, become the best they can be. Whatever cliche you kinda wanna use, I wanna empower people to find that inner strength, joy, passion, all those things, regardless of the storms of life that are gonna come, right? Because they are going to come. You're gonna sail into some storms of life. So if people would say, you know, he was a he was a man who did that and lived his life that way, then I'm that's
Then you're good to go. It was a life fulfilled. Yeah. So I'm going to take time to say thanks for coming on. Also, where can people find you if they want to chat at you a little bit?
the best way is coachchuck360.com, coachchuck360.com, and if it's fine with you, I will offer your guests a free gift.
Absolutely.
All right, so if they go to coachchuck360.com, they can send me a text with their first and last name, best email. Just put Phil Young down, and I will send them a link to a planting it's a masterclass, very short, planting possibility, but it takes you through what I call the becoming a sower of seeds of possibility. So those 5 little lessons or steps in this, but that a lot of people find just kind of a great starting point in this whole process. So I am more than happy to send people the link on how they can access that at no charge.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And you can find me I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and you can find the show on Spotify and YouTube. Thanks for listening, everybody.